All right, so what we're going to look at now is a very specific type of graphing for probability. And so what we're going to use are called tree diagrams. And what we're going to use tree diagrams for is to look for the probability that something happens. So probability is a form of percentage. And it's the chance that something will happen. So we can say that a probability is a way of taking the number of outcomes total number of outcomes versus the outcome you want. So for example, a lot of people will talk about dice on this. Do my bad drawing of a die here, since my squares aren't quite right. And so each die has a number on each side. And let's see, there'd be 6 on this side. And so if I were to roll a die, there are 6 outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are my total number of outcomes. There's a total of 6. Well, if I want to roll a 3, there's a 1 in 6 chance of getting a 3. If I want to roll a 3 or a 4, well, there are 2. So that's 2 in 6, or a 1/3 chance of rolling a 3 and a 4. And one of the ways we can figure out probabilities is called a tree diagram. So let's say I have a coin, because a coin only has 2 options. I can flip it and I get tails or heads. And so when I start, my first flip gives me a tail or a head. Now I do a second flip, and if I rolled tails the first time, my next flip is going to be a tail or head. But if I rolled heads the first time, my option is a tail or a head. This is why they're called tree diagrams. They look like branches. So on the first flip, my outcome is a tail or a head. But if I look at any branch, my possible outcomes are I could have flipped tails, tails, right? Tails, tails going along this branch. If I come along this branch here, I could have flipped tails, heads. Come along this branch, I could have flipped heads, tails. If I came along this branch, I could do heads, heads. And so there are 4 outcomes from the trees. There's 4 ends to these branches for flipping a coin twice. Well, let's combine. Let's roll a die and flip a coin. So if I roll a die, I'll roll a die, and then I'll flip a coin. My possibility for rolling a die, I can roll a 1, I can roll a 2, I can roll a 3, I can roll a 4, I can roll a 5, or I can roll a 6. And then when I go to flip a coin, that's tails, heads, tails, heads. Sorry, I get my tree branches to connect back better here. Tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 possible outcomes of rolling a die and flipping a coin. And what are they? Well, I can roll a 1 and get a tails. I can roll a 1 and get a heads. 2 tails, 2 heads, 3 tails, 3 heads, 4 tails, 4 heads, 5 tails, 5 heads, 6 tails, 6 heads. And so the probability of something happening, the probability of an event, is, so we'll call that P of E, is the number of ways the event can occur divided by the number of total possible outcomes. So if a coin is flipped twice, what is the probability of getting tails first, then heads? Well, if we go back up to flipping a coin twice, there were 4 outcomes, and only one way tails heads could return. So the probability of this was, we have one way that we can get tails heads and 4 possible outcomes. So we have a probability of 1/4. All right, let's do another example here. If we roll a die, what is the probability of rolling a 2 or a 5? Well, all the possible outcomes of rolling a die was 1 through 6. So there are 6 possible outcomes. But our event, 2 or 5, has 2 ways it can occur. We can either roll the 2 or we can roll the 5. So 2 ways to get the event. So our probability of that event is 2 over 6, or 1/3. And so probability is a way of talking about how many different ways there are to get something out of all the possibilities. And it gives us the chance of this happening.